Clowns have long held a dual identity in the human psyche. On one hand, they are symbols of joy and laughter, their painted faces and oversized shoes bringing delight to children and adults alike. But on the other, they occupy a darker corner of our collective imagination, where their exaggerated features and perpetual smiles seem to mask something sinister. This duality has made clowns a staple of horror stories, where their playful personas twist into something far more terrifying. The fear of clowns, known as coulrophobia, is not uncommon. Perhaps it stems from their unnerving ability to exist outside the normal rules of human expression. A clown's face is a painted mask, hiding the true emotions beneath. Their oversized, cartoonish features can feel uncanny, teetering on the edge of humanity but never quite settling into it. In the hands of a skilled storyteller, these unsettling qualities make clowns the perfect antagonists for tales of suspense and terror. From classic urban legends to blockbuster films, the creepy clown has cemented its place as a horror icon. They lurk in storm drains, abandoned fairgrounds, and shadowy corners of our minds, waiting to pounce when we least expect it. Whether they're grinning with malicious intent or simply standing silently in the dark, clowns remind us that not all laughter is harmless. What follows is another unsettling tale of clown horror, where the line between amusement and fear blurs, and the painted smile hides something far more dangerous. There's something unsettling about the way laughter echoes through the dark. It's hollow, almost mocking, especially when it's the only sound piercing the silence of a moonless night. I learned that the hard way last October, when the annual Harvest Festival brought more than just joy to our sleepy little town. I live in Eldridge, population 1,025, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the most exciting event of the year is the Harvest Festival. It's tradition. Hair rides, pumpkin pie contests, corn mazes, you name it. But this year, the festival committee decided to add something new, a traveling circus. They thought it would breathe fresh life into the festivities. What we got instead was something that still haunts me every time I close my eyes. The circus arrived late on a Thursday evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Their trucks were rusted, their banners faded, and their performers, well, let's just say they didn't look like the kind you'd bring your kids to see. But the clowns were the worst. Their costumes were mismatched and tattered, like they'd been pulled from a dumpster. Their makeup was crude, thick smears of white and red that cracked when they smiled. And their eyes, God, their eyes. They didn't just look at you, they looked through you. Friday night was the big debut. The entire town gathered under the sagging red and white striped tent in the center of the festival grounds. The show was odd. The acrobats stumbled, the fire breathers seemed nervous, and the ringmaster's voice cracked as he tried to hype up the crowd. But the clowns stole the show. They didn't perform tricks or tell jokes. Instead, they prowled through the audience, weaving between the rows of folding chairs. They whispered things to people, things that made their faces go pale. I didn't hear what they said, but I saw the looks on their faces. Fear, disgust, shame. I tried to laugh it off with my friends, Jenna and Caleb. They're just trying to freak us out, I said, though my voice wavered. Jenna shrugged, unconvinced. Caleb, ever the skeptic, rolled his eyes. It's all part of the act. They're clowns. They're supposed to be creepy. But something about them lingered, even after the show ended and the tent emptied. The festival grounds felt different, like the air was heavier, harder to breathe. We decided to head home, cutting through the cornfield that separated the festival from the rest of town. It was a shortcut we'd taken 100 times before, but that night it felt wrong. The cornfield was unnaturally still. No wind, no crickets, just the crunch of our footsteps on the dry earth. Jenna and Caleb chatted quietly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of the stalks made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. And then we heard it. Laughter. It started soft, like a distant echo, but it grew louder, closer, until it seemed to surround us. Jenna grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Caleb stopped walking. "It's just the wind," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "There's no wind," I replied. The laughter grew louder still, more distinct. It wasn't cheerful. It was high-pitched, deranged, the kind of sound that made your skin crawl. Then we saw them, shapes moving through the corn, their silhouettes just visible in the moonlight. Clowns. 4, maybe 5 of them, their grotesque faces peering through the stalks. "Run," Caleb whispered, and we did. We tore through the cornfield, the dry stalks slashing at our arms and faces. The laughter followed us, closer and closer. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. They were running after us, their painted faces twisted into wide, unnatural grins. One of them held a balloon, its string trailing behind him like a sinister ribbon. "This way," Caleb shouted, veering left. Jenna and I followed, our breaths ragged, our hearts pounding. We burst out of the cornfield and onto the empty street, but the clowns didn't stop. They kept coming, their laughter echoing off the darkened houses. We sprinted to Caleb's house, the nearest refuge, and slammed the door behind us. Caleb locked it, his hands shaking. We stood there, gasping for air, listening. The laughter had stopped. For a moment, the silence was deafening. "What the hell was that?" Jenna hissed. Caleb shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe they're just messing with us?" "That wasn't a joke," I said. "They were chasing us." We checked the windows, but the street was empty. No clowns, no laughter, just a faint hum of the festival's distant music. Reluctantly, we convinced ourselves it was over, a sick prank by some twisted performers. But deep down, I think we all knew it wasn't. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the trees outside made my heart race. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Jenna. "Jenna, did you hear that?" I stared at the screen, dread pooling in my stomach. Before I could reply, another text came through. "Jenna, they're outside." I grabbed my phone and called her, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic set in. I threw on my shoes and bolted out the door, heading for her house 3 blocks away. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world has stopped. When I reached Jenna's house, I saw it immediately, the balloon tied to her mailbox, its red surface glistening in the dim light of the street lamp. I pounded on the door. "Jenna! Jenna, it's me!" No answer. I tried the handle. Unlocked. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, empty hallway. "Jenna!" I called out, stepping inside. The air was thick, suffocating. As I moved through the house, I noticed things out of place, a broken picture frame, a chair knocked over. And then I saw it. On the living room wall, written in what looked like smeared makeup, "Come play with US." I froze, my blood turning to ice. A sound behind me, a giggle. I spun around, but no one was there. My phone buzzed again. Another text. "Jenna, help me." The message included a photo. It was dark and grainy, but I could make out her face, pale and terrified, surrounded by shadows. In the background, faint but unmistakable, was the face of a clown. I ran. I don't remember leaving the house or how I got back to my own. All I know is that by the time the sun rose, Jenna was gone. The police searched the town, the cornfield, even questioned the circus performers, but they found nothing. No sign of Jenna, no evidence of foul play. Just that balloon still tied to her mailbox. The festival ended the next day. The circus packed up and left, their trucks rumbling down the highway as if nothing had happened. But Eldridge was never the same. People started locking their doors at night, keeping their kids inside. The laughter that once filled the festival grounds was replaced by whispers and fear. I haven't seen Jenna since that night, but sometimes when I'm alone I hear it. Faint, in the distance, carried on the wind, laughter. And I know they're still out there, somewhere waiting. Because clowns don't just perform. They play. And once they choose you, the game never really ends. They say you should never enter the old fairgrounds after dark. For years, I thought it was just another local legend, the kind of story small towns like mine used to scare kids into behaving. But last summer, I learned that and the truth. And now I wish I hadn't. The fairgrounds sat on the outskirts of town, abandoned and crumbling. Decades ago, it had been the pride of our community, hosting the traveling carnival every July. But then something happened. No one could agree on the details, but the story always ended the same. The carnival packed up overnight and never returned. The grounds were left to rot, along with the whispers of what might have driven them away. It was curiosity that brought me there. Me, James, and Riley. The 3 of us had been inseparable since kindergarten, and we'd always dared each other to do stupid things. That night, as we sat around a bonfire in James's backyard, Riley brought up the fairgrounds. "I heard a story," he said, his face lit by the flickering flames. "About a clown named Grinny. They say he's still out there, waiting for someone to come play with him." James snorted. "Grinny? That's the stupidest name I've ever heard." "It's not stupid when you see his smile," Riley shot back. "They say it's too wide, like his face can't hold it all. And if you see him, you'll never leave the fairgrounds." "Bullshit," James said, but I saw the way his hand twitched, the way he avoided looking into the darkness beyond the firelight. "Let's prove it," Riley said, grinning. "Let's go tonight, just for an hour. Unless you're scared." And just like that, we were piling into James's truck, armed with flashlights and the kind of bravado only teenagers can muster. The drive to the fairgrounds took 20 minutes, but it felt longer. The farther we got from the town, the darker the roads became, until the only light came from our headlights cutting through the thick, oppressive night. The fairgrounds loomed ahead, a tangle of rusting rides and weathered tents. The sign over the entrance arch still read "Welcome to the Carnival of Joy," but the paint was peeling, the letters faded. James killed the engine, and we climbed out, our flashlights casting jittery beams across the overgrown weeds and cracked asphalt. "This place is a dump," James muttered, kicking at a discarded soda can. Riley ignored him, his flashlight already sweeping the area. "Come on, let's see what's inside the big tent." The tent he pointed to was massive, its red and white stripes barely visible beneath layers of grime. The entrance flap hung open like a gaping mouth, inviting us in. I hesitated, but Riley was already heading inside, James close behind. I followed reluctantly, the musty air of the tent closing in around us. The space was empty, save for a few broken benches and a rickety stage. But then, as our flashlights danced over the walls, we saw them, clowns. Dozens of them, painted on the fabric in garish colors. Each one had a different expression, some laughing, some crying, some staring straight ahead with wide, vacant eyes. And in the center, larger than the rest, was Grinny. His face was a nightmare. His smile stretched from ear to ear, splitting his face in half. His teeth were too many, too sharp, glinting in the light. And his eyes, they weren't painted like the others. They were real, dark and wet, following us as we moved. "What the hell?" James whispered, stepping back. "It's just a painting," Riley said, though his voice wavered. He stepped closer to the wall, reaching out to touch it. "Don't," I said, but it was too late. His fingers brushed the fabric, and the air in the tent seemed to shift, growing colder. The painted clowns seemed to shimmer, their colors bleeding together. And then we heard it. Laughter. Not the cheerful kind. This was guttural, wheezing, like someone struggling to breathe. It came from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the walls of the tent. Riley stumbled back, his flashlight shaking in his hand. "Who's there?" James shouted, his voice cracking. The laughter grew louder, joined by the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. And then Grinny's voice echoed through the tent, deep and gravelly. "Welcome, friends. I've been waiting for you." The painting moved. Grinny's head tilted, his painted hands reaching out of the wall. We screamed and bolted for the exit, but the flap was gone. In its place was more fabric, stretching endlessly, covered in more clowns, their expressions twisting and contorting as we ran past. "This isn't real," Riley said, but his voice was hysterical. "It's not real." "Tell that to him," James shouted, pointing. Grinny was following us, his impossibly wide smile growing wider, his eyes glowing in the dark. He didn't walk, he glided, his movements unnatural and jerky, like a marionette with its strings tangled. We stumbled into another room, this one filled with carnival games. The prizes hung from the walls, stuffed animals with missing eyes, cracked porcelain dolls, and balloons that sagged like they'd been drained of air. Grinny's voice boomed again. "Let's play a game." "Screw this," James muttered, grabbing a wooden mallet from one of the games. He swung it at the wall, but it didn't even leave a mark. The room seemed to ripple, the walls bending and flexing like they were alive. "No cheating," Grinny growled, his voice right behind us. We ran again, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. I don't know how long we ran, but eventually we burst out of the tent and into the open air. The fairgrounds were silent, the rides motionless, but we didn't stop to question it. We sprinted to the truck, piled in, and sped away. None of us spoke on the drive back. When James dropped me off, I practically ran to my front door, locking it behind me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grinny's face, his smile etched into my mind. The next day, I called James and Riley, but neither of them answered. I went to their houses, but their parents said they hadn't come home. The police searched the fairgrounds, but they found nothing. No tent, no clowns, no sign that we'd ever been there. It's been a year now, and they're still missing. Sometimes at night I hear laughter outside my window, faint and wheezing, and I know he's still out there, waiting for someone else to play his game. It all started with a missing dog. Little Max, a scruffy terrier mix, had bolted from his leash during an afternoon walk and disappeared down the storm drain near the edge of town. His owner, Mrs. Callahan, had been inconsolable, her voice shaking as she posted flyers on every telephone pole. Normally, I wouldn't have paid much attention. Dogs ran off all the time, especially around here. But then, kids started talking stories about strange noises coming from the storm drains at night. Laughter, whispered voices, and a face pale and painted peering out from the darkness. It's probably just some homeless guy, my best friend Mason said when I brought it up. We were hanging out at my place, scrolling through social media while the rain drummed against the windows, or some kid messing around. Maybe, I replied, but I couldn't shake the image from my mind. A clown in the storm drain. It sounded ridiculous, yet it gnawed at me. By the next week, 2 more pets had vanished. A cat named Whiskers and a golden retriever named Buddy. Their owners found the same thing, a torn leash or collar near the storm drain, as if something had dragged them inside. The police said it was likely coyotes, but no one really believed that, not after the story started spreading. Mason and I decided to check it out. We told ourselves it was just for fun, something to kill the boredom of a rainy Saturday. Armed with flashlights and our phones, we rode our bikes to the edge of town, stopping where the road dipped into a shallow ravine. The storm drain yawned before us, its mouth wide and black, the iron grate pushed aside like a loose tooth. Creepy, Mason muttered, stepping closer. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a tunnel lined with moss and graffiti. Water trickled along the bottom, the sound echoing like a distant whisper. You go first, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Mason grinned. Scared of the dark? Scared of clowns, I shot back, but he just laughed and ducked inside. I followed, the air growing cooler as we ventured deeper. The smell was awful, a mix of rot and damp earth. Our footsteps splashed in the shallow water, the sound unnervingly loud in the confined space. See? Mason said, his voice bouncing off the walls. Nothing here but. He froze mid-sentence, his flashlight beam fixed on something ahead. A balloon, bright red, bobbing gently against the curve of the tunnel. What the hell? I whispered. Mason stepped closer, reaching out to touch it. It's just a balloon, he said, though his voice was quieter now, uncertain. He grabbed the string, and that's when we heard it. Laughter, high-pitched and faint, like it was coming from far away. But it wasn't. It was getting louder, closer. Let's go, I said, grabbing Mason's arm. But he didn't move. His eyes were fixed on something deeper in the tunnel. Another balloon. Then another. A trail of them, leading farther into the dark. Are you seeing this? He whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding. Let's get out of here. Now. But before we could turn back, a voice echoed through the tunnel. Don't go, we're just getting started. It was deep and gravelly, tinged with a sick kind of glee. I swung my flashlight wildly, but the beam only cut through empty shadows. Mason was breathing hard, his grip tightening on my arm. Who's there? He shouted, his voice cracking. The laughter came again, louder this time. And then a face emerged from the dark. Pale, painted white, with a blood-red smile that stretched far too wide. The clown, his eyes gleamed, dark and hollow, as he tilted his head and took a step toward us. Run, I screamed, and we did. We sprinted back the way we came, slipping and stumbling in the water. The tunnel seemed longer now, endless, the exit a pinprick of light in the distance. Behind us, the clown's laughter echoed, along with the slap of footsteps on wet concrete. Faster, Mason yelled, but I was already running as fast as I could. The air felt thick, every breath a struggle. The exit was so close now, just a few more steps. We burst out into the open air, collapsing onto the wet grass. I turned to look back, expecting to see the clown, but the tunnel was empty. Just the faint trickle of water and the rustle of wind through the trees. "Did you see him?" Mason panted, his face pale. I nodded, unable to speak. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. Who was he? What was he? We didn't tell anyone what we saw. Who would believe us? But the missing pets never came back, and neither did the kids who dared each other to explore the storm drain after us. Every few weeks, someone new would vanish, their last known location always the same. The storm drain is still there, still open, still waiting. Sometimes on quiet nights, I think I can hear the laughter, faint and far away. And I wonder if the clown is still down there, smiling in the dark, waiting for someone foolish enough to come closer. I've learned one thing since that night: some places are better left alone, and some smiles should never be seen.